So was the bank vault. Questions were predetermined or swapped out at the last moment to match a likable contestant's specialty. Some people got the questions before the shows. Others never knew they had guardian angels, so to speak. A terrible thing to do to the American people, Ike thundered. The Revson brothers saw it differently. They were just giving customers what they wanted. Congress disagreed. Their public shaming wiped big money quiz shows off the air for an entire generation. Americans already reeling from the payola and point shaving scandals wondered whether shady money had infiltrated every aspect of popular culture. Was anything as it seemed? So that's a very interesting situation. We'll look at the picture a little more carefully. Let's see if I can get it to be a little more clear. So, in this image, it says this photo, taken on the set of the $64,000 question in 1956, shows the isolation booth, which is in the center. So, you can see the central booth, which is called the isolation booth, and it was supposed to ensure that contestants couldn't cheat. Well, they maybe couldn't hear, which is basically all this isolation booth was going to protect them from, but they already knew the answers in some cases, or at least the answers or the questions were designed so that they could actually, figure it out easily if they were a preferred contestant. So, if you remember, there was a movie with Ray Fiennes. I actually mentioned this last time when I was talking about the payola scandal, and it's interesting that there were so many scandals occurring right around the same time frame. One of the reasons that this may have actually become a national scandal that Congress actually got involved with might have been because President Eisenhower was an avid watcher and fan of the show, like so many Americans were. If you remember, the movie Ray Fiennes was the character that was, I guess, considered the preferred guest because he was a handsome man. I think he played a professor, or I'm not actually sure what his job was, but he was attractive and I guess was getting good ratings for the company, and the show was really just a vehicle for the company to advertise during the commercial breaks. So the Revlon company, I didn't know that Revlon was actually Revson, Revson. So that was the original name, and then they switched the S for an L and made it Revlon. But anyway, the Revlon company just needed a vehicle, something interesting to keep people watching so that they would stay tuned during the commercial breaks. And at that time, obviously, people didn't change the channel as they do now. Now, usually people just, flip the channel every time a commercial comes on. But at that time, somebody would have to get up and actually change the channel manually. Even if they had clickers at that time, they might have had very, I don't know, primitive or very early versions of clickers, but most of the time people stayed tuned during the commercials as well. And it was just a great captive audience because millions of people were watching these shows. They became extraordinarily popular, and just like in films, the producers, the Revlon brothers in this case, realized that if you have an attractive guest, someone that can hold the audience's attention for, I guess, a couple of weeks, these shows would go on for about 4 weeks while they were building up to the $64,000. It would hold people's attention because they were not going to change the channel, and they would stay for the duration of the show, so that maybe 5 or 6 commercials especially in the early days of reality shows. Everyone really got into some of the early reality shows because they seemed to be about real people. It was almost like watching a documentary, and the more crazy they got, the more involved people became watching those shows. But after a while, after so many had been released, it became very obvious that shows, even these reality shows, were heavily scripted, that they were really like improvised dramas, that, the situations that these people were getting into were set up. And so, I think maybe even reality TV has lost some of its interest to the public because they realize that it's contrived and created, and because this was something that was similar, not, it wasn't exactly a reality show, but people felt it was real, and they were watching it almost like a soap opera because they would become attached to these characters for like a 4 week period. Over a number of weeks, you're watching the same person with mounting tension. Each question brings them closer to this huge bundle of money. It's definitely something that will keep you tuned, and because you think it's a real person, they give you a little bio about the individual. You think you can sort of feel that you are that person as well. You can kind of live vicariously through them, and that's part of the appeal. So to realize that the whole thing was fake, I think would upset a lot of people, especially Eisenhower, who, was taking time out of his schedule and watching this show because he had the power to actually call a congressional hearing for a game show, rather than just letting this go through the court system, which is probably where it would have originally gone. This became a congressional matter because I think he felt betrayed, like all of the audience members. He was a fan himself, and he felt betrayed because of probably the time and energy that was spent watching a show like this, and all of the stress that he might have gone through, as you're watching the person, the time tick away, and the person is sitting there sweating, and you just feel like you're in that isolation tube with them. And they sort of showed scenes like that in that Ray Fiennes movie. I think it was called Quiz Show. And so, what was interesting, the way that show was exposed. I think that was supposed to be like a general show. It was based on this $64,000 question, but it was kind of combining all of these mini shows, because there were a couple of them: Dotto, Tic Tac Doe, spelled with a D, and 21. So there were a couple of shows that came out simultaneously or subsequently after this $64,000 question, and all of them kind of went through the scandal at the same time. So that quiz show movie had combined all of them into this one concept show, and the Ray Fiennes character was the preferred guest that everyone had their hopes set on winning, and the John Turturro character was the one that maybe was not considered as attractive, but was actually a smart guest. And I can't remember the movie 100%, but I believe the Turturro character was getting answers up to a point, and then either he was told to lose or to give the wrong answer or something like that, but he became aware of the scam. And then the Ray Fiennes character, who had been given these kind of easy questions, or questions that he almost surely would be able to answer, was suddenly presented with this option of being given the questions, and I guess the answers as well. And because he had been involved with the game show for a number of weeks and had attained a certain amount of celebrity, he then had the big dilemma as to what he was going to do. So I guess the Turturro character was represented by this guy, Herb Stempel, who was the one who was coerced into losing, and then the Charles Van Doren character was played by Ray structure of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. It seems to have been based on this very popular original show. Hopefully, that there weren't any scams with the Millionaire Show, but I know that especially at that time when it was so popular, before it had gone into syndication, when it was just one of the most popular nighttime game shows, people would have freaked out if it turned out to be a scam, because when you're watching contestants that look like average people and they're answering questions that are not that difficult, especially in the beginning questions, and you happen to know the answer, you're able to kind of live vicariously through them. So it's very easy to get caught up in the drama, plus the music and the sound effects. And because it's a limited time frame to answer each question, there's like tension and drama and conflicts all rolled in. It is like a kind of movie or TV show. It definitely kept everybody involved. I remember watching that with my mom and brother in the evenings when it would come on, and I can imagine that in the when was this on? The 1950, does it say the year? Well, yeah, 1956. So in the 1950s, this must have been a huge phenomenon for families as well, because I know that it was definitely something that we were watching and other people were watching, because people would talk about it the next day. So, these game shows, as well as even I think the reality TV movement or whatever that was that happened a couple of years ago, it really does attract an audience because you feel that you are those people. So when you find out that, especially when the reality shows started becoming really obviously staged, it's kind of a letdown. You sort of feel like, wow, it's not real, and those people maybe are just totally acting. So I think they lost a lot of fans, or people just couldn't force themselves to be interested when it started to seem so fake. And even with the game shows, even though I don't think there's been a major game show scandal, I guess eventually it loses a little bit of interest over a period of time. But I can imagine this being a major upsetting factor for people who had never been exposed to something like this, because this was like the first round, I guess, of a national game show that had taken on such importance in American culture. And it's weird that so many simultaneous scandals were going on. The Payola scandal with the music industry, and then this game show scandal, and then the point shaving scandal with the basketball games and whatnot, the baseball scandals. It was like a series of scandals that were, I guess, happening in the 1950s, and then in the 60s there was all the craziness with public figures getting assassinated. So it was just a strange time in the 50s and 60s, and I think that people sort of felt, I guess, betrayed by that. There was a certain image of American society and how it ran, and as things were getting exposed, I think it left a sort of bitter taste, and it probably, that feeling has never totally left. Like, we still feel, I think we're affected by that, even though we might not have been part of that generation. We still feel, okay, well, not all of this is real, and it's kind of like we watch things with a little bit more of an eye, looking at the I don't know, looking maybe for the scandal or the conspiracy in it, or at least I know that it's definitely affected people who became aware of that sort of thing. So